I think we see education as crucial. It's an absolutely necessary condition for sustained poverty reduction.
Western schooling is responsible for introducing a human monoculture across the entire world.
We sort of think that, we educate our kids, we send our kids to school, and peoples who don't mimic those same patterns of education somehow don't educate their kids. Well, of course, that is absurd.
I
don't know about my culture very much.
Nobody speaks the fluent Ladakhi.
Yeah, if somebody speaks Ladakhi or Hindi, then teacher give him or her punished him.
We moved from wisdom to knowledge, and now we are moving from knowledge to information, and that information is so partial.
We just after money.
One of the things that's most disturbing to me is that you have an institution that is in place globally that is branding millions and millions and millions of innocent people as failures.
Most of the students of Ladakh, they don't do very well.
90% end up failures.
They're in-between people, and they're falling through the cracks of an in-between world.
We put out this idea, which I think is a blatant lie, that if people buy into the dictates of our economic paradigm, that somehow they will magically achieve the wealth that we enjoy in the West. Ain't gonna happen.
This model isn't even working in America.
And I think the profound kind of damage that it's doing, we'll recognize generations from now, and then we'll look back and say, how could we have done this kind of thing to people?
There is an assumption that Western education is something that is superior.
These peoples aren't failed attempts at being us. They're unique answers to the fundamental question, what does it mean to be human and alive?
The intent really is to get every child into school.
For if we are to fit and train such children for the future, they cannot be left as they are.
Kit potara kaleya kon sukul yalba ta ziri diga borwan gle kon sukul rulea sukul yalba zale ta ziri kelagle.
Good morning. Extraordinary evidence of human creativity in all of the presentations that we've had and in all the people here. Just the variety of it and the range of it. The second is that it's put us in a place where we have no idea what's going to happen in terms of the future. No idea how this may play out. I have a big interest in education, and I think we all do. We have a huge vested interest in it, partly because it's education that's meant to take us into this future that we can't grasp. If you think of it, children starting school this year will be retiring in 2065. Nobody has a clue, despite all the expertise that's been on parade for the past 4 days, what the world will look like in 5 years' time. And yet we're meant to be educating them for it. So the unpredictability, I think, is extraordinary. And the third part of this is that we've all agreed, nonetheless, on the really extraordinary capacities that children have, their capacities for innovation. So I want to talk about education, and I want to talk about creativity. My contention is that creativity now is as important in education as literacy, and we should treat it with the same status. Thank you. What these things have in common is that kids will take a chance. If they don't know, they'll have a go. Am I right? They're not frightened of being wrong. Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. So why is this? But something strikes you when you move to America and when you travel around the world. Every education system on earth has the same hierarchy of subjects. Everyone, doesn't matter where you go. You think it would be otherwise, but it isn't. At the top are mathematics and languages, then the humanities, and at the bottom are the arts, everywhere on earth. And in pretty much every system too, there's a hierarchy within the arts. Art and music are normally given a higher status in schools than drama and dance. There isn't an education system on the planet that teaches dance every day to children the way we teach them mathematics. Why? Why not? I think this is rather important. I think maths is very important, but so is dance. Children dance all the time if they're allowed to. We all do. We all have bodies, don't we? You know, did I miss a meeting? I mean, I think... Truthfully, what happens is, as children grow up, we start to educate them progressively from the waist up. And then we focus on their heads, and slightly to one side. If you were to visit education as an alien and say, what's it for, public education, I think you'd have to conclude, if you look at the output, you know, who really succeeds by this? Who does everything they should? Who gets all the brownie points? You know, who are the winners? I think you'd have to conclude the whole purpose of public education throughout the world is to produce university professors. No. They're the people who come out the top, and I used to be one. So there, you know. And I like university professors, but, you know, we shouldn't hold them up as the high watermark of all human achievement. They're just a form of life. You know, another form of life. But they're rather curious, and I say this out of affection for them. There's something curious about professors. In my experience, not all of them, but typically, they live in their heads. They live up there, and slightly to one side. They're disembodied, you know, in a kind of literal way. You know, they look upon their body as a form of transport for their heads. You know, it's... Don't they? It's a way of getting their head to meetings.
Tem sido negado nas escolas, nas creches, nas instituições escolares, não porque essas instituições elas não enxerguem o corpo como fazendo parte do processo educacional. O corpo é negado na sociedade. Do iluminismo, na época do Renascimento, esse corpo teve que ter sido deixado de lado para supervalorizar a razão da ciência, porque era necessário a gente superar o período da Idade Média. Então a ciência tinha que chegar com bastante força e com isso a razão, a ciência foi supervalorizada e o teórico passou a ser de uma forma muito mais presente do que o prático. Hoje nós ainda carregamos a herança, a grande herança de que o corpo, as atividades práticas, jogos, brincadeiras ainda são vistos como uma coisa de segunda qualidade, uma coisa não tão séria. E aí nós deixamos a razão supervalorizada em detrimento da emoção, do afeto, do corpo. Nossa comunicação ela é totalmente corporal. Nós somos totalmente corpo. E nós só vamos começar a comunicação verbal tempos depois do nosso nascimento. E, no entanto, a gente se comunica de uma forma fantástica, sem uma única palavra, porque nós nos comunicamos pelos gestos, nós nos comunicamos pelos olhares, nós nos comunicamos por todas as emoções que transbordam pelo nosso corpo. Não é um corpo mecânico. O corpo é a expressão da sua personalidade, o corpo é a expressão da sua cultura, o corpo é a expressão do seu momento histórico, o corpo é a expressão da política em que você vive no teu país, na tua nação, na tua cidade. Então nós precisamos entender que esse corpo é tudo e que é um erro a separação entre mente e corpo. Essa separação ela existiu porque ela foi necessária para estudos, mas ela na prática, no cotidiano, ela não acontece. É impossível a separação de mente e corpo, mas nós insistimos nisso. Então, quando a escola começa o seu trabalho de construção do conhecimento, a escola trabalha nesse conceito de corpo e mente. É mais ou menos como se o corpo só servisse para transportar a cabeça para a escola e transportar essa cabeça de volta para casa e fazer com que essa cabeça pense. Obviamente, se a gente adoece por inteiro. Se a gente tem saúde por inteiro. Se a gente está feliz por inteiro. Se a gente entristece, a gente está triste por inteiro. É impossível essa separação.
Our education system is predicated on the idea of academic ability. And there's a reason. The whole system was invented around the world. There were no public systems of education really before the 19th century. They all came into being to meet the needs of industrialism. So the hierarchy is rooted on two ideas. Number one, that the most useful subjects for work are at the top. So you were probably steered benignly away from things at school when you were a kid, things you liked, on the ground you would never get a job doing that. Is that right? Don't do music, you're not going to be a musician. Don't do art, you won't be an artist. Benign advice, now profoundly mistaken. The whole world is engulfed in a revolution. And the second is academic ability, which has really come to dominate our view of intelligence because the universities designed the system in their image. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. And I think we can't afford to go on that way. In the next 30 years, according to UNESCO, more people worldwide will be graduating through education than since the beginning of history. More people. And it's the combination of all the things we've talked about, technology and its transformational effect on work, and demography and the huge explosion in population. Suddenly, degrees aren't worth anything. Isn't that true? When I was a student, if you had a degree, you had a job. If you didn't have a job, it's because you didn't want one. And I didn't want one, frankly. So, but now, kids with degrees are often heading home to carry on playing video games. Because you need an MA, where the previous job required a BA, and now you need a PhD for the other. It's a process of academic inflation, and it indicates the whole structure of education is shifting beneath our feet. We need to radically rethink our view of intelligence. We know three things about intelligence. One, it's diverse. We think about the world in all the ways that we experience it. We think visually, we think in sound, we think kinesthetically, we think in abstract terms, we think in movement. Secondly, intelligence is dynamic. If you look at the interactions of a human brain, as we heard yesterday from a number of presentations, intelligence is wonderfully interactive. The brain isn't divided into compartments. In fact, creativity, which I define as the process of having original ideas that have value, more often than not, comes about through the interaction of different disciplinary ways of seeing things. And the third thing about intelligence is it's distinct. I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated by how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer, and everybody knows her work. She did Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Gillian and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. She couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s, and ADHD hadn't been invented, at this point, so it wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak-panelled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, their homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So he said, wait here, we'll be back. We won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? He said, she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down.
Para esto, es necesaria una forma de aprendizaje que rompa con los esquemas educativos a los que estamos acostumbrados, que se basan en la memorización, la competencia, el abuso de autoridad, la falta de creatividad e imaginación, la importancia de lo mental sobre lo emocional. Un nuevo sistema debe basarse en la emoción, el aprendizaje mediante la experimentación y el descubrimiento, que fomente la integración.
But I believe there's a second climate crisis, which is as severe, which has the same origins, and that we have to deal with the same urgency. And I mean by this, and you may say, by the way, look, I'm good, you know, I have one climate crisis, I don't really need the second one. But this is a crisis of not natural resources, though I believe that's true, but a crisis of human resources. I believe fundamentally, as many speakers have said during the past few days, that we make very poor use of our talents. Very many people go through their whole lives having no real sense of what their talents may be, or if they have any to speak of. I meet all kinds of people who don't think they're really good at anything. I meet all kinds of people who don't enjoy what they do. They simply go through their lives getting on with it. They get no great pleasure from what they do. They endure it rather than enjoy it and wait for the weekend. But I also meet people who love what they do and couldn't imagine doing anything else. If you said to them, don't do this anymore, they'd wonder what you were talking about. Because it isn't what they do, it's who they are. They say, but this is me. You know, it would be foolish for me to abandon this because it speaks to my most authentic self. And it's not true of enough people. In fact, on the contrary, I think it's still true of a minority of people. And I think there are many possible explanations for it. And high among them is education. Because education, in a way, dislocates very many people from their natural talents. And human resources are like natural resources. They're often buried deep. You have to go looking for them. They're not just lying around on the surface. You have to create the circumstances where they show themselves. And you might imagine education would be the way that happens, but too often it's not. Every education system in the world is being reformed at the moment, and it's not enough. Reform is no use anymore, because that's simply improving a broken model. What we need, and the word's been used many times during the course of the past few days, is not evolution, but a revolution in education. This has to be transformed into something else. What I think it comes to is this. Al Gore spoke the other night about ecology and the revolution that was triggered by Rachel Carson. I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we strip mine the earth for a particular commodity. And for the future, it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. There was a wonderful quote by Jonas Salk, who said, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years, all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. And he's right. What TED celebrates is the gift of the human imagination. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely and that we avert some of the scenarios that we've talked about. And the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it. Thank you very much.
É óbvio que precisamos ter conhecimento sobre o processo de evolução dessas crianças, mas junto com isso, é tão necessário quanto a gente ter a percepção, a gente ter a sensibilidade de permitir que essa criança se expresse, de permitir que essa criança explore os diversos espaços da onde ela está. Está tão preocupado em controlar as ações, a gente está tão preocupado em seguir o planejamento, que a gente não se dá o direito de de escapar, de deixar o planejamento ser um caminho flexível, de poder ir mais para lá, de poder ir mais para cá, de poder retornar, de poder acelerar, de acordo exatamente com a dinâmica que as crianças nos dão. É importante ter sensibilidade, é importante ter percepção, é importante permitir que as coisas aconteçam, é importante relaxar no controle que a gente faz com as crianças nos primeiros anos de vida. Essas crianças, elas já trazem uma história muito grande de vida corporal da sua família, do seu bairro, da casa onde mora. E essas vivências, essas heranças corporais, elas podem e devem ser usadas dentro da escola. É preciso quebrar o muro que a escola, a creche, a educação infantil faz entre a comunidade e a instituição escolar.
Born very good learners, and then basically we spend the rest of their life destroying that. So I think it's really about understanding the social behavior of kids, both online and in the physical world, and trying to tie that together, connect that learning into the traditional academics. We use 4 words to describe what is the essential pieces of learning, which is project, peers, passion, and play. So project-oriented, kids like to do things, and so help them learn while they're doing things. Peers, kids like to teach each other, just not only the same age, but across ages and with adults. So I think it's a social behavior, not just studying for a test by yourself. Passion is so important. You know, I think an ounce of passion is worth as much education as you can ever imagine, because kids that are passionate will continue to learn forever. The idea is that kids hang around with each other, and they see somebody doing something and they say, hey, can I try that? And then they mess around. And if they find that interesting, they geek out about it. And that's the pathway to learning. It's not, is it going to be on the test? Do I need it for my degree? Education is what other people do to you, whereas learning is what you do to yourself. Another principle I like is disobedience over compliance. You never get a Nobel Prize for doing what you're told. You actually come up with new ideas by questioning authority and thinking for yourself. Another one I like is compasses over maps. For me, having a compass heading and then sort of figuring it out as you go along in many cases is very important. But the world is so complex and so changing that you don't really know exactly what's going to happen when you get there. And the cost of making the plan or the map often exceeds the cost of just trying things. Another one I'll mention is pull over push. So it's pulling things from the network when you need them, rather than stalking and planning and preparing and then centrally controlling it. So it's the difference between centralized control, top-down control, versus much more bottom-up or innovation on the edges.
La educación, por más cambios que ha tenido a lo largo de la historia, tenía la esencia de enseñar a vivir en la Tierra, a adaptarnos al mundo físico, aprender sobre la formación de las cosas, sobre el manejo de la supervivencia, sobre la lógica del cuerpo de Dios, sobre la comunicación entre los seres, sobre la relación entre los seres. La educación debe servirnos para la adaptación al mundo, para aprender conscientemente a manejarnos en él, aprender de nosotros mismos y de los demás en
que permite una ampliación de la visión del aprendizaje que va más allá de la educación, sino va en pro de la integración del ser humano, desde que uno nace hasta que uno muere, para aprender y ayudar a aprender, y nada más.
¿Dónde aprendimos sobre los ecosistemas? ¿Visitando un bosque o mediante una fotografía en un libro? ¿Dónde aprendimos a manejar nuestro cuerpo? ¿Danzando, jugando o en un afiche con nombres complicados? ¿Cómo aprendemos idiomas? ¿Y qué
escribiendo, leyendo o comunicándonos en conjunto? ¿Cómo aprendemos el teorema de Pitágoras? ¿Memorizando la fórmula o descubriéndolo como lo hizo el mismo Pitágoras? Sabemos que la Tierra gira alrededor del Sol, pero ¿alguna vez miramos al cielo tratando de entender por qué?
Y eso se da a través de la práctica, de la experiencia, y no de la teorización. La teoría sirve solamente para entender una parte de todo lo que realmente hay que hacer. Por ejemplo, que todo lo que enseñen, todo lo que sea práctico en casa, lo que se tenga que saber hacer en casa, en la escuela, en la sociedad, sea aplicable a la escuela, a la sociedad y a la casa. No todo lo que se enseñe debe ser aplicable a la vida diaria, porque ahí es donde realmente está nuestra labor, donde todos tenemos que trabajar. El mundo ahora se ve en cuarta dimensión, por lo tanto es amplio, no es focalizado, sino que es circular hacia todos lados, por lo tanto. Pero lo más importante, lo primordial para poder manejar todo esto, obviamente está en padres y maestros, que son los primeros que tienen que cambiar la visión y los primeros que tienen que hacer un gran quiebre en sus conceptos sobre la sociabilidad, que ya no es alguien que te indica lo que hay que aprender, sino que alguien que aprende en paralelo, es un compañero de aprendizaje, alguien con quien se puede llegar a un consenso de aprendizaje, en el que cualquier cosa, por más que uno ya lo sepa, siempre hay algo nuevo por entender, y se aprende en conjunto. Por lo tanto, tener en cuenta que los padres se han convertido en guías, y los maestros en compañeros.
There are things we're enthralled to in education. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is the idea of linearity. That it starts here and you go through a track, and if you do everything right, you will end up set for the rest of your life. Everybody who's spoken at TED has told us implicitly or sometimes explicitly a different story. That life is not linear, it's organic. We create our lives symbiotically as we explore our talents in relation to the circumstances they help to create for us. But you know, we have become obsessed with this linear narrative. See, it's outrageous as a conception, but it tracks through. The other big issue is conformity. We have built our education systems on the model of fast food. This is something Jamie Oliver talked about the other day. You know, there are two models of quality assurance in catering. One is fast food, where everything is standardized. The other are things like Zagat and Michelin restaurants, where everything is not standardized. They're customized to local circumstances. And we have sold ourselves into a fast food model of education. And it's impoverishing our spirits and our energies as much as fast food is depleting our physical bodies. But it's not only about that, it's about passion. Often people are good at things they don't really care for. It's about passion and what excites our spirit and our energy. And if you're doing the thing that you love to do, that you're good at, time takes a different course entirely. My wife's just finished writing a novel, and I think it's a great book. But she disappears for hours on end. You know this. If you're doing something you love, an hour feels like 5 minutes. If you're doing something that doesn't resonate with your spirit, 5 minutes feels like an hour. And the reason so many people are opting out of education is because it doesn't feed their spirit. It doesn't feed their energy or their passion. So I think we have to change metaphors. We have to go from what is essentially an industrial model of education, a manufacturing model, which is based on linearity and conformity and batching people. We have to move to a model that is based more on principles of agriculture. We have to recognize that human flourishing is not a mechanical process, it's an organic process. And you cannot predict the outcome of human development. All you can do is, like a farmer, is create the conditions under which they will begin to flourish. So when we look at reforming education and transforming it, it isn't like cloning a system. There are great ones, like KIPS, it's a great system. There are many great models. It's about customizing them to your circumstances and personalizing education to the people you're actually teaching. And doing that, I think, is the answer to the future, because it's not about scaling a new solution. It's about creating a movement in education in which people develop their own solutions, but with external support based on a personalized curriculum. You know what I mean? Human communities depend upon a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. And at the heart of our challenges, at the heart of the challenge is to reconstitute our sense of ability and of intelligence. This linearity thing is a problem.
Ultimamente, as instituições escolares, elas constroem um conhecimento com muito pouca participação corporal. Geralmente o ensino é obediente, estático, em fila e calado. E isso não é nada bom. Obviamente a educação ela precisa ser lúdica, ela precisa ter movimento, ela precisa ser criativa, ela precisa estar com um aspecto de conhecimento muito mais atuante do que a gente está parado pensando e construindo conhecimento. O conhecimento deve ser construído por completo, não apenas com a cabeça, e sim com o corpo inteiro.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey! Teacher, leave them kids alone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.